Used Mazdas hold their value well, but they also don't age too quickly. Although they're technically inferior to their German competitors in many respects, owners appreciate them for their high durability and standard engines. That is, engines with displacement appropriate for the car, not turbo-fueled ones. What engines were installed? The Mazda 3 features only 4 powertrains, with a total of 5 power outputs. Only Sky-active engines are used, which includes direct fuel injection and high compression ratios in the gasoline engines and low compression ratios in the diesels. All engines feature low-effort design, which Mazda engineers believe will improve combustion, reduce emissions, and provide the driver with a natural driving experience. The petrol range begins with a small 1.5-liter engine producing 100 horsepower and ends with a 2-liter unit producing 120 or 165 horsepower. Diesel options also include 2 engines, a 1.5-liter with 105 horsepower and a 2.2-liter with 150 horsepower. In the US market, the Mazda 3 was also offered with a 2.5-liter gasoline engine producing 185 horsepower. The 120 horsepower gasoline engine and both diesels were paired with an optional 6-speed automatic transmission. All manual transmissions also had 6 speeds. Which engine to choose? I'll start with the petrol engines, which are supposed to provide a natural driving experience. The driver does indeed experience a natural driving experience in a petrol version if they're coming from a model from the 1990s or early 2000s. The point is that the naturally aspirated petrol engines don't have the same low and mid-range dynamics as their competitors, making the driving experience feel like smaller turbocharged engines simply feel faster. For example, the VW Golf 7 with the 1.4 TSI engine, rated at 125 horsepower, offered at the same time, has dynamics comparable to the 165 horsepower petrol version of the Mazda. This is subjective. The Mazda 3 only pulls away from it at the top end of the rev range, but this is a range rarely used by drivers. Therefore, if we want to drive the Mazda 3 as dynamically as models with smaller turbo petrol engines, we need to use the rev range from 3,500 revolutions per minute upwards. I want to make it clear that switching from a Golf TSI, Focus EcoBoost, or 308 THP to a Mazda can be disappointing in terms of performance. That doesn't mean you can't get used to it. If you have high expectations in this regard, it's best to buy the most powerful variant or opt for the diesel. The Sky-active G petrol engine is a delight for its refined operation and incredible flexibility. It can get going from just 1,100 to 1,200 revolutions per minute. At this point, Ford's EcoBoost will want to break free and leap out from under the hood. The 120 horsepower engine is almost exactly the same as the 165 horsepower. And up to 4,000 revolutions per minute, they also have very similar characteristics. Just note that both engines develop the same maximum torque of 210 Newton-meters at 4,000 revolutions per minute. The difference begins after this value. The 120 horsepower engine has a very rapid torque drop-off, resulting in less power, while the 165 horsepower version has a much more gradual drop-off. How should this be understood? If you don't care about dynamic driving and don't rely on the top end of the rev range, but prefer a low-end, smooth, and economical engine, the 120 horsepower engine will be suitable for you and is exactly the same in 95% of cases as the more powerful unit. On the other hand, buying the more powerful version doesn't compromise on higher fuel consumption, although according to users, the car consumes about 0.5 liters 100 kilometers more, but this is mainly due to the desire for dynamic driving. Average fuel consumption for both engines is around 6.5 to 7.0 liters 100 kilometers. The 1.5-liter gasoline engine, however, is noticeably less powerful, developing only 150 Newton-meters of torque. It feels weaker than Ford's 100 horsepower EcoBoost or Volkswagen's 1.2 TSI. It's sufficient for city driving and leisurely cruising. Thanks to its smaller displacement, fuel consumption is marginally lower, at around 6 liters per 100 kilometers. For those who are particularly frugal, we can recommend the 1.5-liter diesel, which isn't particularly dynamic but averages about 5 liters per 100 kilometers. The more powerful and larger diesel engine averages about 6 liters per 100 kilometers and has by far the best dynamics in the range. It accelerates the Mazda to 100 kilometers per hour in 8.1 seconds. Thanks to a double turbocharger, serial charging, it generates 380 newton-meters of torque between 1,600 and 2,600 revolutions per minute. And in practice, this is a typical driving range. Unfortunately, diesels are potentially more expensive to repair, and we're the only ones with drawbacks. So when choosing this engine, you should be aware that you may not see any savings in long-term use. However, the driving pleasure of the 2.2-liter version is certainly worth it. Manual or automatic? It's a difficult choice in the Mazda 3. Manual transmissions work perfectly and are trouble-free. They're ideally suited to petrol engines, which sometimes require quick gear changes. In such cases, they don't work with a dual-mass flywheel. Dual-mass flywheels are only available in diesel engines and are relatively expensive. A 1.5-liter costs around 2,500 euros, while a 2.2-liter costs nearly 3,000 euros. The automatic transmission doesn't work with a dual-mass flywheel. It's a durable Mazda design transmission, but it's sluggish. Paired with petrol and diesel engines, it robs them of their dynamics significantly. Acceleration to 100 kilometers per hour takes about a second longer. While this isn't as noticeable in the 2.2 diesel, it is in the petrol. In my opinion, if you're going to buy a 2.2 diesel, it should be a facelifted, more refined one. I'd pass on the 1.5 diesel as it's quite rare and doesn't offer anything special. The safest bet is the 2.0 petrol engine, regardless of which version. Typical faults. I'll start with the engines, although there aren't any major problems here. Some early 2.2 diesels suffered from worn camshaft lobes, which led to a loss of oil pressure and even filing. Repairs typically cost at least 5,000 euros if done properly. Fortunately, camshafts are readily available. Additionally, they had problems with DPF burnout, which resulted in oil dilution. Perhaps the roller wear itself was related. However, the problem was eliminated after the facelift. The rare 1.5 diesel engine likely doesn't have these faults, but the sample size is also much smaller. In fact, little is known about it. It's the same unit installed in the CX-3, among others. Gasoline engines sometimes experience MAF sensor failures, battery discharge, start-stop system failures, or oil leaks from the timing cover. There's no need to worry about direct fuel injection, as it's durable and typically carbon-free. Interestingly, Skyactiv G engines are readily converted to LPG, and it doesn't pose a significant problem. All engines have a timing chain, which typically requires no maintenance before 200,000 kilometers. Oil changes are recommended every 10,000 kilometers, although Mazda allows for twice that. Due to the presence of a DPF in diesel engines, frequent oil level checks are also recommended. In other areas, the Mazda 3 is a problem-free car. Bodywork corrosion isn't as severe as in older cars or the Mazda 6, but the car has very delicate paintwork. If anything corrodes, it's usually the exhaust system and suspension bolts. Occasional issues with the multimedia system or folding mirrors occur. Operating costs. Maintenance costs will be low if the car doesn't break down, so it's worth buying a Mazda 3 from a reliable source. Buying a car from the US and a diesel with an unknown history is a significant risk. Therefore, domestic gasoline engines hold their prices the best. Unfortunately, repairs are expensive because Mazda doesn't share its technology with other manufacturers, so some parts can only be purchased at authorized service centers. Fortunately, many high-quality replacements for this model have become available. The suspension is durable, and despite the multi-link rear design, frequent repairs are not a concern. Brakes are replaced more frequently, and a complete front set costs around 600 euros. The most expensive wear and tear on diesels is the dual-mass flywheel. Replacing the clutch, along with the 2.2 diesel, will cost around 7,000 euros, and a slightly lesser replacement for the 1.5. Another major expense is the injectors, although aftermarket replacements have become available, so a set can be purchased for around 7,000 euros. Replacement isn't always necessary, but after higher mileage, a timing belt kit for a 2.2 engine may be necessary. This costs around 3,000 euros plus labor, so you should expect a cost of around 4,000 euros.
By comparison, a timing belt kit for a 2.0 petrol engine costs around €1,000.
A major expense in maintaining a car is insurance, including theft insurance, because, as we all know, Mazdas are stolen on a massive scale. While not in every region of the country, in large cities, you can quickly lose a car. Most often, they're stripped for parts, which is worth keeping in mind when buying used cars.